What I say, the idea of how to approach the ideas that we are all after is having in mind and having read, therefore, Bion's background, particularly his history from India onwards, right, when at age 8 he was moved to England all alone, away from his parents, to do his schooling, and what happened from there on, right? His military history in World War I, and then his history as an army psychiatrist in World War II. Because as you will see, and you probably already got a hint of that from Blandonier's very good biography of Bion, is that nothing that Bion said or conceptualized is free from the charge that history had on him. And all his idea that came later in writing in his book Learning from Experience has really to do with his own life and himself having learned from the experience of life first, and having then taken that to do his conceptual and theoretical work. That is why I wanted you to read all that prior to this first class. Then what we'll do, we won't be able to go through the summary of the totality of his work, and I don't think we are going to get to the concept of O and so on, because that belongs to what Blandonier calls the later Bion, or the mystical Bion, right? We have 6 meetings in all, so if we get to but from experiences in groups to the theory of thinking, and in the last class we can get a glimpse of an understanding of the grids, I would feel very satisfied, and we could leave the later Bion for some later group at some later point. But that, I mean, if we go through that hand in hand with Blandonier, who is always giving us a little bit of a historical background. Where was Bion when he was thinking of groups? What were his experiences that he then conceptualized? Where was he when he wrote the last chapter of Experiences in Groups? That is, when he summarized it all after he had gone already into analysis with Melanie Klein. How did that coalesce? And then we will see that there is a continuity between his thinking before he went into psychoanalysis with Klein, but he was in analysis with some doctor. You read that. We never know who this doctor was. He only called it Dr. Phipp, because this Dr. Phipp, apparently, every time he said something, he said to him, find it in the past. So he humorously called this psychoanalyst Dr. Phipp, although he never said who he was, right? Probably not a very valuable experience for him, and it may be that was some wild psychoanalyst who thought in a Freudian way that everything that happens in the present is related to the past. So if you have anything that is happening to you with your analysis in the present, you have to find it in the past, and that would be the cure. But then he went into analysis, as you read, with John Rickman, who had to interrupt the analysis when the Second War happened, and he became then his partner in his work in groups in the army. And then he went into training with, after that, with Melanie Klein, which was an entirely different experience. So we will see how each of these pieces, right, that is the group work, which we're going to hopefully talk about today, and then the psychotic period. Blandonier here or there called it Bion's psychotic period, meaning the period where Bion wrote and was interested in experiences with psychosis. We will spend some classes on that, some meetings on that, and then we will go to Bion's version of the Oedipal conflict, which is quite interesting, and then to the theory of thinking. And the theory of thinking, that is what Blandoni calls Bion's epistemology, I think is the most original piece ever written in psychoanalysis by anyone, because psychoanalysis has lacked ever an epistemology. Psychoanalysis has more dealt with illnesses, neurosis, psychosis, or all the range of psychopathology, but there is no consistent body of theory in psychoanalysis that tells us how do we learn to think and what are the deviations or the impairments of thinking that is proper to the epistemology. Piaget wrote about epistemology, but that was not psychoanalytic. That was a different epistemology. So I think we really have to acknowledge Bion for having done that. And in so doing, I'm giving you here really a quick panoramic view of what we're going to do. In so doing, he took out psychoanalysis from the realm of having to cure the ill into furthering the ability to think, right? Of course, from there, one could look at neurosis or psychosis or the different ranges of psychopathology as, let's say, varieties of disorders of thought. But it's about thinking and disorders of thinking, how we get to know, how do we unknow what we know, right? And how can we help people to further thinking? In that regard, you will see that psychoanalysis, and we had Caper a week ago talk about that, you see, psychoanalysis can leave up to psychiatry or psychiatrists who have to cure illnesses to devote itself to further thinking and to become therefore more a branch of education or of, let's say, human culture than a branch of medicine that has to cure illnesses. Although, and I think Caper was very right when he brought that last week, it seems to happen that if you treat disorders of thought and you further thinking, the secondary effect of that is that very often it does cure illnesses in a very peculiar way, only that is not necessarily its central aim, right? Now, that said, let's start with your impressions of what you read for today, that is chapter 5 and 6, right?
Yes.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Okay.
One of the things that wasn't answered in there, and I was curious about it toward the end, when Bion hypothesized that having a group of individuals who've been psychoanalyzed or were in psychoanalysis would be different, a different kind of group that wouldn't have the same. The question is he saying that this group who's been psychoanalyzed won't have those same three troubles with pairing and with fighting and flighting and what was the first one? Dependency. Thank you. Yeah. So is that?
I haven't read that piece. Okay. Is that in here?
Yeah. It's in chapter
6.
Chapter 6.
Yeah.
I must have overlooked it, probably because I don't think that way. But anyway, Does he say that literally?
Well, he says he kind of gave up the idea and left it to, it was kind of vague, to an individual, but in the future who might do that.
Yeah, I remember him saying that he wondered whether a group of analyzed people would respond differently to those three basic assumptions.
Yeah,
maybe they
I
wouldn't
see.
get stuck in them.
I see.
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
And then what would it be then about the analyzed person that would be
What would be different?
that they didn't get stuck in the
Right.
dependency and the fighting and
Right.
the antagonism?
Right. Well, it's interesting that Blandoni would mention that. I don't think that Bion continued thinking that way after he entered the British Psychoanalytic Society, and then when he came to California and found that the same mess that happened there happened here, that the psychoanalytic institutions are not any better than any other sort of institution. Yes, truly, right? That it's part of the human nature and the nature of groups, right, to have all these kinds of phenomena, and that, as he says, well, actually I want you to say it. Let us start with the basic assumptions then. What are the basic assumptions? There are a few concepts I want to make sure that we cover today, right? Not too many, but basic assumptions and the different basic assumptions, what they are, what the differences are between them, what is a work group, what are valencies. You say valencies or valencies? I don't know. Valency.
Valence, but
Valency? In chemistry? Valency, okay. What are valencies? What are, and Blandoni makes a little mistake there, where he calls what Bion called the specialized basic assumption groups. Blandoni calls them aberrant groups. Now, aberrant basic assumptions, Bion talks about that, but that's not the same as specialized groups, which is a different thing. But we're going to cover all that. So that and whatever else you're particularly interested in regarding concepts, so as to make sure that we have a bit that we can cover the ground, the conceptual groundwork of what's being said in these two chapters before we move on.
so this may not be accurate, but okay.
Yes. Hello?
I was going to say something. In
Sure.
terms of the specialized work group, he said something that I thought was quite interesting, which was that these work groups are likely to stimulate a certain basic assumption, but that that the basic assumption becomes dangerous if an attempt is made to translate it into action. So I was wondering about that. In terms of all basic assumptions, in the sense that, can you hear me?
There is some noise
There's
here.
a static, huh?
Yeah, I don't know. Okay, go ahead. It's better
Is that better?
Yes.
Yeah, so he seems to be saying something about how these anxieties get triggered in groups, but they're fantasies, and they have to remain somewhat at a fantasy level, I think, is what because otherwise, if they're played out in action, they become dangerous to the group.
Right.
Is that what he's saying?
Well, not exactly, but let us see what the rest of the people think. You were about to say something, Jay.
Well, I think a lot in analogies, and one of the analogies that was seemed to be in the back